Language and social status. Have you ever asked yourself this question? What is language? No? Well, language is primarily a means of communication. This includes body language. There are many languages in the world, as well as dialects, idiolects, and sociolects. I will be focusing on the last one. As with almost everything in life, language has a structure, and the people of that language also live within a structure, or hierarchy in this case, with specific patterns. In Chile, there is a clear bridge between people, directly related to the socioeconomic aspect of their lives. And although this can be associated with the regional characteristics, a social link will prevail in spite of the geographical aspect. Our linguistic performance is the way in which we deliver our thoughts verbally. But our experiences and realities can influence this, as we all have different accents and expressions. So, someone with a second language already has an advantage compared to other members of society, as their lexicon and access to different information is expanded greatly. Not so long ago, the French language was used as a remark of high status, and most private school students had the chance to become bilingual. Another example of this phenomenon is African American English versus the standard version of English. As the name implies, a standard is what is expected of citizens of that country. But African American English has its own grammatical structure that's often frowned upon. Every language has its own culture and capacity to isolate those who don't follow the norm, resulting in the segregation of the most vulnerable. By culture, I'm referring to the ideologies of the different social classes. I would like to say that most people don't realize that attacking or judging our socialite and accents implies their aversion to a certain community and what they consider to be an inferior version of their language. But in reality, the variation of the language that we use most probably has been shaped by the place in which we were born, the place our ancestors were born, our wealth, and lastly, our privileges, or lack thereof.
For today's video, we conducted 6 interviews here at UMSE, where we asked the same 2 questions to different students and persons alike. The questions were related to the way they speak and how discriminations contemplate into that.
Por un acento regional que tengan, por un sonido específico que lo buscan.
No,
No, nunca.
En
Cualquier contexto.
Sí, pero en la parte como más laboral. Me trabajan donde te trate como gente que diga.
depende. Porque como dije, estoy en pedagogía en inglés y tengo que hablar inglés. Y mucha gente me juzga diciendo que soy cuica o pretenciosa o X cosas, cuando en realidad no lo soy. Costó aprender inglés como todos, hice mi esfuerzo como todos y eso.
No, jamás. Porque acá dentro de la universidad no.
¿Y en algún otro contexto?
De repente entre amigos y cosas así pasa, pero más son más bromas y que nos reímos juntos.
No, yo no.
En ningún ambiente, en ningún contexto.
No realmente.
No. No, no.
O sea, al menos yo lo veo como laboral, que puedes tener como mayores oportunidades para viajar también, como que podéis como llegar como más fácil como moverte dentro de otra ciudad. Como eso.
Yo igual concuerdo, como que igual tiene como una parte bien así como relacionada al turismo, pues, comunicarte con más personas. Igual tiene toda una parte lingüística también, pues como de entender cómo se fueron formando otros idiomas.
Yo creo que depende de la persona. Y porque a muchos en Chile en especial no les interesa el aprender un segundo idioma porque no lo ven como algo necesario. Yo por mucho tiempo lo vi así. Yo cuando empecé a estudiar inglés lo odiaba, porque estudié en el instituto, lo odiaba, me metieron como porque me querían cambiar de colegio. Entonces nunca le vi la necesidad, aparte de que fuera entretenido después con el idioma. Entonces, o sea, para la gente es como si necesitan una pega, a lo mejor les sirve. Pero en Chile como que no le toman el peso al segundo idioma.
ampliar tus fronteras principalmente.
Yo creo que igual para abrir más puertas hacia el mundo, para poder comunicarse más mundialmente, para expandirse culturalmente.
Aprender inglés o por qué otro idioma extranjero.
Bueno, la verdad, es como que nunca lo he pensado. No, como que...
¿Hay opinión?
No.
O sea, no sé si segregador, pero siento que se enseña mucho de manera aislada, porque se supone que el lenguaje como que uno se supone que lo adquiere como en la práctica, como en vivir como dentro del idioma. Pero como en inglés como de la sala de clases es muy del verbo to be y al final como que llegáis a, no sé, por mí me pasó que uno llega a otro país y me sé los colores, ¿de qué me sirven los colores ahora? Es como que no es tan funcional al momento de como llegar como a exponerte de verdad a una situación en que todos hablan otro idioma y uno ahí.
Sí, yo creo que es importante lo que decís como del inglés funcional, porque, por ejemplo, en otro tipo como de carrera de turismo, ahí te enseñan como inglés comercial, po, así como cómo relacionarte con un extranjero en la sala de clase, es como un poco más mecánico. Y pasa lo mismo en todos los países, pues existen así como modismos, formas de expresarse, cosas que uno no entiende muy bien, acentos, ¿cachai? Los acentos británicos, americanos, supongo. Entonces, como que igual está el debe la parte pedagógica del inglés, como tener metodologías como más bacanas.
Oye, sí. Sí, porque como dije antes, pues estudié en un instituto donde fue pagado, privado y todo lo atado, y después tenía la comparación en el colegio, donde en realidad no aprendía nada. Entonces, en el colegio cuarto medio todavía aprendiendo el verbo to be y en el instituto cuarto medio hablando ya casi fluido. Entonces se notaba que tenía la oportunidad para aprender de otra manera y iba a aprender mucho mejor que en el colegio, que era una corporación, que era totalmente gratuito.
Sí, porque si tú tenés ya dinero principalmente, puedes ir a los mejores institutos donde te pueden enseñar más rápido inglés. Si una persona de ya escasos recursos les costaría mucho ya llegar a hablar que fluido al menos.
Sí. Realmente sí. Porque ya venimos como con o sea, nos enseñan como ellos creyendo que nosotros ya tenemos un conocimiento previo. Entonces si alguien viene aquí sabiendo hacer inglés es muy complicado, claro.
Sociocultural context matters greatly in any interaction, since it gives us information about the background of each person. You can tell from where a person is by the way in which it uses phonemes, by their accent, or the pronunciation overall. By knowing the sociocultural context of an individual that is speaking, it can help with intelligibility problems, since by adjusting the listener's ear to expect different pronunciations, these problems will be reduced. However, sociocultural context can also change the way we use language. We may choose to use different words, pronunciations, or the speed in which we speak. This may be done just to make oneself more intelligible, but it can also be used to discriminate against people from different countries or places, just by recognizing the accent of that said place. On the other hand, we have the economical context, which, at first thought, may not be too related to language, but it does affect the way in which we use the language. Depending on our economic background, we may have been better educated than someone with a perceived worse one, so we may have better access to a second language learning process from an early age, which is really important in these cases. Also, economical context varies the way in which we produce language, because necessities are not the same, so people from different economical contexts may learn different ways to reduce some words, as well as having a bigger or smaller vocabulary. Both contexts may be used to differentiate individuals. Someone with a sociocultural and/or economical context perceived as better may discriminate or treat differently to people with contexts perceived as worse. As an example, we can see here in Chile, the people from the south, who are considered as guasos, they have different words or expressions that here at Santiago we don't have. We can also see examples of economical context discrimination, like for example, with the expressions of cuico or roto. In reality, no context is better nor worse than the other. I believe that we shouldn't discriminate against people for coming from different backgrounds, but that we should try to coexist and live together, trying to integrate the good parts of both sides. Humankind tends to classify everything, and in doing so, we end up putting everything in different boxes. New language variations are created every time we speak to someone. The problem comes when these language variations depend on previous misconceptions.
Good examples of this could be the United Kingdom and India. As both countries are quite unequal and hierarchical, in the United Kingdom it's very normal for people to use RP to have better jobs opportunities and be perceived as people of higher status, and on the other hand, in India, the mere fact of being able to speak English fluently is a characteristic that gives them a better position in society. Without going any further and giving an example of this phenomenon that is closer to the people of our country, you can see this when we catalog the people who use ch as in Chile as people of high class, therefore with good education and respectable way of speaking, but on the other hand, people who use sh as in Chile, we perceive them as the opposite. Why do I think that knowing this linguistic phenomenon is important? In my personal opinion, as a teacher in training, we must be aware of them because they also occur in the classroom and within the whole context of Chilean education, where English was not always a compulsory class in public schools with lower resources, while in many upper class schools, English is one of the most important subjects. Even in some of them, all classes are taught in the language, giving students even more space to learn and surround themselves with the language. Another problem that occurs for this reason might be the pronunciation and Spanish accent that students who were not surrounded by the language tend to have, since it is believed worldwide that native pronunciation, not necessarily correct if we speak phonetically, is what indicates a good use and study of the language. These students should be aware of whether they want to keep their Spanish accent in the use they give to their English, or if they want to sound as native as possible. We think the latter should not be mandatory since it promotes an imperialistic idea, but neither can we blind ourselves to reality and not give our students the necessary tools to succeed in the world of work. So one of our approaches should be to teach them to identify scenarios and context. In this way, they will be able to use the English they see necessary depending on what they want to do. I believe that the use of English and different languages, whether foreign or dialects spoken within our country, should have more relevance within our educational system, since leaving this element aside for the lower classes creates in the subconscious of these children the idea that they not need it for their daily life, since as a lower class they will not never need to travel outside the country or have a job that require it. And it is important that our future students are able to see themselves as capable of achieving the goals they want to set for themselves.
Besides the previous interviews, we also conducted a short online survey, which allowed us to get more varied answers overall and more straight to the point. Some of the questions were related to the perception of language as a whole, while the latter questions focus more on English specifically. For context, around 65 people took participation in the survey.
for context, 60% of them consider themselves middle class. The remaining 40% divided itself into 30% lower class and 10% higher class. With that in mind, 60% of them has felt discrimination for the way speech. 40% of them believe that speech can be used as a marker of social status, while other 40% straight up believes that it is a marker of social status, which is especially relevant as the people surveyed were around the ages of 17 up to their mid-20s, which implies that a considerable percentage of them still works under old stereotypizations, or the idea that your language determines your social status and such, which isn't something that should remain to this day. Still, in more English related questions, 20% of the interviewers consider themselves fluent in English, with 50% of them considering themselves good enough or decent. The question itself was, what was the purpose of learning a second language? Sociocultural related answers were 60% of the total, with only a 20% difference with economic, though that percentage was sort of shared by itself because a lot of answers included both factors. But this shows that there's a tendency to a more practical view of English, or a necessity to demythicize English as an elitist or important language. One of the answers centered around the idea of using English to speak with immigrants who don't know Spanish, therefore making our interactions and the way we work with others much more better. That type of change is necessary in the social perception of languages, because not only do their variations cause discrepancies among ourselves or discussions or misunderstandings, but the simple idea of interpreting languages as beyond one another unpractical.
We as a group think it is an idealistic idea to believe that socialites will disappear someday near. The truth is that there are lines that have been implemented for centuries, and we must focus on spreading awareness so people can understand this phenomenon. Spreading this information will help to people to realize how language works, and they will be able to change their thoughts about social linguistics and how it impacts our lives every day.